Hey everybody, I just finished this new book, Reading the Psalms as Scripture from Lexham Press. It's a small little book. It did not take me long to get through, and instead of doing a full deep dive review, I'm going to do more of like a shorter highlight video. I quite liked this one, so this is going to be pretty positive, and I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what this is, and then some of my reactions to it to give you a sense of whether or not you should pick this up. But yeah, I quite like this one. So thank you to Lexham Press for sending me this for review. This is written by James Hamilton Jr. and Matthew D'Amico. I was not familiar with either of them, but have learned since going through this that James Hamilton has done quite a bit of work on the Psalms specifically in terms of commentaries and some biblical theology and typology kind of work, which really suffuses this little book. So I'm kind of interested in more of his work after having read this. But let me give you just an overview of what this book is and maybe what it isn't. This obviously is a book on the Psalms. It also fits very squarely in the biblical theology vein of writing, also a lot of kind of biblical typology. So what I mean by that is it presumes that there's a literary artistry to the composition of Scripture. It's not getting into source criticism or redaction criticism or any of that kind of stuff. It kind of takes the holistic canon just as it is, and then looks at the holistic canon and looks for, signs of literary artistry or intentional composition, things like allusions, things like foreshadowing, all of that stuff. It looks for those kinds of things in the entirety of the Scripture. In this case, in the entirety of the Psalter, or the 150 Psalms that are in the Jewish and Christian Scriptures. And so it's kind of looking at the whole collection of Psalms and asking questions about how they've been composed, how they've been put together. Is there anything we can learn by looking at it from a bigger, zoomed-out view, from that biblical typology, literary, canonical unity, kind of perspective? So that's the angle this book is coming from. And what it is it's very short, as you could see. It's very super succinctly written, but each chapter has a lot in it. And so what it really, it's a remarkable kind of scope of work for how really small it is and how easy it is to read. And each chapter gets into a different kind of facet of understanding the Psalms. So there's work on reading individual Psalms and looking for poetic literature, artistry within an individual Psalm, like parallelism and chiasms and all of those kinds of work, if you know what those terms mean. But there's more page count, and what I loved about the book are the chapters devoted towards looking at the movements of the entire Psalter. So they put forward this idea, and this is not just them, they're pulling on other scholarly work too, but they make a pretty compelling case for seeing the Psalter as intentionally organized to move through the story of Israel. And so the 5 books of the Psalter, which mirror the 5 books of the Pentateuch, and, well, not exactly mirror, but it's kind of a typological, numerological symbol to point toward that fivefold, structure. So they argue that the fivefold structure of the Psalter also points towards the story of Israel and the organization of, David's Psalms are concentrated near the beginning. And so there's kind of the story of David and his ascent and then his descent after his kind of fall from grace, so to speak, with Bathsheba and the story of Absalom and the revolt and all that stuff. And then the Psalter even they argue it goes into a kind of an exilic section, with certain Psalms focusing on the exilic kind of despair and the sadness and the lament of that period of Israel's life, and then pointing toward the new Exodus and the final sub-book of the Psalter. I loved all that stuff. I thought it was fascinating, and they do a remarkable job at economical writing that also makes it like a compelling kind of scholarly case. And so they do a lot of work you can zoom into individual Psalms, then you zoom out to the whole Psalter. They do a lot of work on the seams of the Psalter, so like the intentional placement of particular Psalms in the divisions of those 5 books and what that could mean. There's a chapter on the superscriptions and how to understand how the superscriptions apply to the context of the Psalms, how that could affect your reading of it. There's chapters on other allusions to Psalms in the Old Testament and the New Testament writings. There's a chapter at the end on how do you incorporate the Psalms maybe more effectively into worship or gathered worship. So there's a lot going on in terms of exploring the Psalter in this tiny little book. And so let me just give you some. That's the overview of the main idea. Let me just give you some of my reactions. I've already been pretty positive about this. I'm pretty clearly positive on this book. And I've already said a little bit of why, but I'll just kind of tie it all together by saying that I think this is an excellent, easy read, but also packs a punch as a resource. There's really good research behind it. There's very, very good, compelling cases to be made that they make effectively about, the literary artistry in the Psalter, how it applies towards our study of it, how it can actually enrich our appreciation of the scriptural narrative overall. And so, I really liked it. I really appreciated the care that went into this project, and I appreciate the intent to keep it so easy to read and such a powerful, like, the insight per page kind of ratio is extremely high in this one, which is not always the case with publishing. And so that's a really big breath of fresh air. And for those of you watching this channel, if you are interested in something like this, but don't have the time to sink into a big overwrought commentary, man, this is an excellent intro. I could see this being used by church leaders, also by worship leaders, especially if you're thinking about designing liturgies, or even incorporating psalms or songs, or writing songs based on the psalms, and like how to approach that. How to preach the Psalms. I think I could see this being a really enriching, quick little book to read on that. In general, it is an excellent resource for increasing your appreciation of the placement of the Psalter in the scriptures, and also just the breadth that the Psalter addresses. It's not just a hodgepodge collection of biblical poetry. It's actually a lot more going on there in the writing and composition of it, and putting it all together in the final canonical form that it's in. And so this book just does, I think, it's like a home run of a little book in terms of if you're looking for something that's going to give you that increased appreciation, or if you're just looking for something to kind of get back into understanding the Psalms. Like, it does all of that, and it does it all in a very accessible style and a very winsome kind of little package that's super easy to recommend. I mean, this is going to be my go-to intro to the Psalms tool, honestly. I think it's that great, and also that easy to recommend because of how small it is and how readable it is. And it also points towards, like, especially Hamilton's work looks like you can go into a deeper dive. The work cited at the end and the footnotes throughout point you to deeper resources. So this is just like an ideal intro and a bridge to maybe deeper study. So that's my highlight on reading the Psalms as scripture from Lexham Press, written by James Hamilton and Matthew D'Amico, and I loved it. That was great. A really big, pleasant surprise for me. So thank you to Lexham Press for sending this for review, and hopefully this gives you an idea of something you might be interested in. But as always, thank you for taking a few minutes to watch.